The very first time, incredibly, that I met Gianni Versace was on South Beach at News Cafe. And the funny thing is, I knew him sort of when I just started out in the business. I had not yet ever gone overseas to do any type of work, including like, you know, the summer or fall winter fashion shows, which is where I really actually met him properly. But I met him at the News Cafe because I was having like a brunch there with a couple industry people. And one of them was an agent, and another one was somebody who was like breaking into the business. And Gianni, incredible as he was just sitting by himself, which I found out later was he was very prone to do, was just sitting there flipping through newspapers and magazines and enjoying a coffee and a, you know, croissant and that sort of thing. And I was introduced to him, and so that is actually then officially the first time I met him, and he was just very ciao bello, this kind of a, you know, real brief, but real pleasant. So it just happened to be right down the street from where we're sitting right now.
So the first time I met Gianni Versace was with my modeling agent, Bill Arndt. He had this modeling agency called Hero. It's in Los Angeles. I remember he brought me to his office and he said, if you're going to get anywhere in this career, you need to go to Europe and you need to get tears. And he said he could introduce me to Gianni Versace and a few of the other big designers, and asked if I'd go with him. And I said, yeah, let's go.
The first time I met Gianni Versace was the summer of 1993. I had just graduated from Johns Hopkins, where I studied epidemiology, biomedical ethics, and I matched at Mount Sinai Medical Center on Arthur Godfrey Boulevard. I remember jogging on the beach in the weekends of my work. I would work, you know, 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. at Mount Sinai every day, and then the weekends I had the downtime, and I was able to jog, and I would see Gianni with these beautiful beach towels on the beach, and it was Donatella, and he had this igloo container where he had sandwiches and paninis and drinks and all that.
So I met Gianni, it was in 1989, and my first impression of him was, you know, you could just feel the presence of somebody who was really on their game, and he expected that from us, and so it was a wonderful experience. The only thing I can remember saying is "bella, bello, bello, bella." So he was it was an amazing thing. It was just when I finally got booked for the show, I was like, wow, I finally made it, you know, to work for Versace, and it was such an important thing for me. I started modeling in around 1985 in Hawaii, and then went to Australia, went to London. So the name Versace was such, and still is, an iconic name. Every model actually wanted to do a Versace show or campaign. That was the designer that everybody wanted to work for. So my first meeting with him was they did a big show in Japan. And then I was asked to do a photo shoot. This particular editorial was my first time working for Versace, and this was in Japan in 1989.
After an apprenticeship with his mother's dressmaking company, he began working for the House of Jenny in 1973. By age 25, he was designing 3 of their labels. In 1978, he founded his own signature line, and in 1982, he added a new chapter to his career as a costume designer. Year after year, he continued to push the boundaries of fashion.
Basic is the inspiration is women and art and history and music, pop. Everything can inspire me. I think I'm so curious, and life is so beautiful.
It was like a red eye. We got there early in the morning or mid-morning, and we took a cab with all our luggage, and we took a cab straight to Versace's house or apartment. And I'm thinking, this is kind of weird. I'm not really sure, is this real or not? But, you know, I was into exploring. And we ring the doorbell, and we wait. And lo and behold, Gianni Versace answers the door. And what I remember most was this smile. Like, he had never met me before, but he had this big welcome smile, and it made you feel so warm. And he greeted us, and he brought us in, and before I know it, I'm having lunch with just Gianni Versace, at that time his boyfriend Antonio, and my agent.
So every Saturday morning I used to watch CNN program Style with Elsa Clench. So she would have interviews with the designers, and and runway shows. And I knew all the designers' names, but I didn't know what they looked like, or I couldn't identify, what was an Oscar de la Renta gown at that time, but when I first started watching it. But there's always one designer that I liked more than all the others. He was sweet, he was kind, just very, very charming. And I didn't know his name at the time. If I didn't see him on, I would think, well, where's that nice guy? I haven't seen him in a while. So he was my absolute favorite. So, and I kept following him. I just loved his kindness.
I remember one day, I said, ciao, and he was like, ciao, come stai? And he was so nice to me, and he asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, I'm a graduate of Hopkins, and I do epidemiologia, biomedica etica, biostatistica, and he's like, no, it's biomedica etica, and he was correcting my Italian, and he was just so gracious and so kind and so curious. That's the one thing about Gianni. He was a curious person. He wanted to know about, you and what you're doing, and he wanted to know about all the different things that were happening in the music world, what was happening in the Miami nightlife world. He was so interested in everyone and everything.
When I first knew about him was through a friend of mine, Melissa Sardinia, who I first met through a friend of my mother's who was an FIT woman who owned a bunch of boutiques in Coconut Grove. And her name was Freddie. So that's how we ended up meeting Melissa, because Freddie and her went to school together. Then we both moved in to the same building when we had our babies, which was a building called Grove Towers in the Grove.
I'm imagining it was in the early 80s. I probably met him. It's hard to remember. Went on a show casting and met Gianni, and he booked me for the show, and so nice, like a little kid. Kind of like Jean-Paul Gaultier in that respect.
When I worked with Gianni in Miami, the Miami Stories, he was so interested in kind of like the urban movement and what that was. I was doing hip hop music at the time, and I think that he really wanted to understand that world.
I remember the audition was basically you had to disrobe, get naked, and jump in the air and do all kinds of weird flips. I thought this is like the weirdest job ever. And then you realize that they were looking for us to be kind of the male lamppost for the women. What really struck me about Gianni was he was just so interested on like who I was, where I was from, what sports I liked to play, what my hobbies were, what my background was, my nationality. And it was quite an introduction. From that introduction, I went on to do quite a few campaigns and shows for him.
I always had the second track, and that was acting. My first movie was in 1988, Hairspray, with John Waters and with Ricky Lake. And I remember coming to Miami, I'm like, okay, if the medical stuff doesn't pan out, I can be an actor and model. So I got cast in The Specialist with Eric Roberts, Sharon Stone, and Sylvester Stallone as the restaurant manager of the Fairwind Hotel. So I'm shooting my scene as the restaurant manager. Eric Roberts is on the right of me, Sharon Stone is on the left of me. They kiss in the scene, and then I look to the left, and walking down Collins Avenue is Gianni Versace and Antonio D'Amico walking to the set. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And so he came to visit Sylvester Stallone and Jennifer Flavin. So we broke, and he sat with them, and he was there chatting with them, and they were having tea together, and he invited him back to his house and so forth. And I was like, wow, this is the most magical time, and this is the most greatest place to be in my life right now. It was in South Beach in the 90s.
I knew Versace because I had been a model, and I lived in Paris, and I did his show from 1979 till 1985. So I knew him. I had worked for him.
That experience, once I graduated college, I wanted to volunteer. And I went back and I became a reunification, I have the master's degree in mental health and counseling psychology. So then I went back as a volunteer therapist and counselor.
It was one of the biggest shows to do. It was a lot of fun. It was a big deal and colorful and exciting.
So we did all the fundraising because Gianni Versace's merchandise was available to us, and they bent over backwards to do what they could to help with the charity.
I like to dress different people, different personality. I think fashion is the way you express yourself. And I like to leave to the women the desire to express themselves between using my fashion. You know, I don't want to use women. I let them use me.
This is really amazing because I've been so blessed. You know, I've traveled millions of miles in the business, and I've gotten an opportunity to meet with and, you know, work with a lot of the industry's top designers, you know. And with Gianni, what was always really interesting to me, really compelling when I look back on it now, is that he'd always ask me about me. You know, it was like he was that sort of a giving guy. I mean, he wouldn't, it was amazing. He would ask me questions like, I had done some stuff in one of the photo shoots where I was like kind of doing some like boxing and stuff, and he would ask, and he had broken English, you know, he'd be like, you boxer, you athletic, you know, he'd ask me questions about myself and what I liked, and he asked me about like what books I liked and what I liked about his line of clothes, or what I enjoyed about the photo shoot we had done. You know, he was really sincere about it though too. You know, he was really keenly and sincerely interested about other people and who he was talking to. He made it about the other person, and I always found that to be one of my favorite things about Gianni.
Gianni wanted to know what your lifestyle was. You know, what kind of sports did you play? He was always into music. What kind of music did you like listening to? At that time too, it was like Guns N' Roses was huge. Michael Jackson was huge. Yeah, he was kind of into the arts, but it didn't ever seem like he had an agenda. It really seemed like he was doing it to make me feel comfortable. He was doing it to let me know that I was safe. Obviously, he sees young models all day long. He probably saw a little trepidatious look in me, and I think he really kind of went out of his way to say, hey, it's okay, welcome here, you're part of the family now. And indeed, I think I was for the last little bit of that Versace era.
You know, periodically I would go back to Baltimore and come back, and he was there on the beach with just everyone else laying on his towel. Beautiful Baroque neoclassical towels that he designed.
I think I change step by step my fashion. I become a little more free, I think. That's what I like about my life today. I'm less into the business and more into the creativity. I think creativity has become important again. When you have a million of designers, they become all the same. To me, it's boring.
First and foremost, breaking into this business is very difficult. It's extremely competitive, and one of the ways in which to do it is to, you know, go overseas and to do the fashion shows and, you know, kind of put yourself in the orbit of the whole fashion industry and world. But what really broke my career, factually, was doing the worldwide Gianni Versace campaign. And it was by no means at the time that I was doing it that I know that was what was taking place. There was Bruce Weber was the photographer. Donatella, his sister, was there. He was there. We started in Naples and we went over to Capri Island. And they had about 25, if not 30 guys there, and a couple girls, one of them being Helena Christensen, which was incredible because she was just beautiful. And at the time, she was actually with Michael Hutchins of NXS, and he actually flew in for a couple days of the shoot. But the shoot was done in such a way that the first few days, they were just kind of shooting like all of us in a very lifestyle sort of way. So we would be like, you know, out in the backyard, for example, and, you know, they'd have us like, sort of like with some of his summer clothes, just sort of like just running around the backyard and interacting. And I had some shots taken where I was just kind of standing with this shirt Versace shirt just wide open and the wind was blowing through, and they're like, put some sunglasses on him, do this, do that. And I didn't know it at the time, but they didn't tell us like this is going to be this worldwide Versace campaign. It was sort of like a photo shoot. And what they did after the first few days is they basically told about a half a dozen guys, you're staying for another 10 days, you know, and I happen to be one of those guys. And I was just blown away because I was realizing I was being invited to be part of this really major, you know, global campaign. Well, there's the cover of it, right? So the memory brought to this is Helene is actually sitting here on the other end of the boat. And what happened in this particular instance, this is all Versace home collection. And so this was a home collection campaign. So this was all gatefolded in like Vogue magazine, Condé Nast, and, you know, all the magazines around the world, you know, Italian Vogue and all of that. And so this was Versace home collection with Helena Christensen. There's all of us with like Donatella. This is a great example of like, these were like the guy, like there's this sort of like, we're invited to stay and there's Donatella, like, you know, just sitting, look at her. I'm just, to me, this always stands out in my mind because Donatella had on these outfits. It's about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, right? In these particular photographs, and there's Donatella in all black. And then she also had this like
such
zip.
a trooper to wear.
Oh yeah, you know, and she was really a part of it all, you know, as we all know.
I started out in, I think, Milan. I did Milan and Paris. My first shows was the Versace show, Gaultier, and Armani. I think it was that season that all the big designers do. That was my first introduction. I think that was like 1994, 93, 94.
My time working with Gianni was more about, I was into music at the time. I just came off a tour with Dead or Alive. We did a world tour. I was able to perform with them, and I wanted to do music. So he knew that I wanted to do more and I think that Gianni gave us a platform to do that, where he really would say, hey, I'm going to give you a platform to do these amazing shows, but I also want to give you the platform to go out and do what you want to do, whether it be acting, musicianship, or whatever. And so I was able to perform. So I think that when I worked with Gianni in Miami, the Miami Stories, he was so interested in kind of like the urban movement.
This was the cover of a catalog I don't remember. But I do remember the photo and the photographer. This was Bruce Weber. We shot this out in Miami. And they had about 15 of us. Rib Hillis was there, a bunch of my friends that I'm still friends with now. Rick Yoon, he's an actor, he was there. And yeah, we all flew out there and went out to this little resort. We spent like 3 or 4 days there, and we just shot all over the place. What was nice is after that job, they had a private little dinner for Bruce Weber in Gianni Versace's Miami house, which I was able to attend. And that was quite an honor as well.
The contributions Gianni Versace has given to the fashion industry are beyond. I believe his first shows were in 1977 and 78. Before that, he designed for Complice with Gianni, and then, of course, he designed for La Scala in Milano. But he has contributed to our world and our consciousness and to everything from architecture to music. And for me, he was very empowering. I mean, I remember being cast in my first Versace shows at Bell Harbor Shops, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I felt so alive wearing his clothes. I mean, this current shirt is a Versace trend shirt for the latest collection, which is, you know, I would say 20 years later. I'm aging myself, but 20 years later. And to this day, these beautiful gold hues and these Baroque patterns and the detailing and the Greek key, all those things that he did to this day are relevant. And I was happy when I was able to speak with Eric and with you, James, about, you know, how he designed, but he made you feel free and alive. He loved the fact that there was streetwear, and that he would take the urban world and he would apply it to his fashion and style. And I love that. And he was always on the pulse of what was next in the fashion world.
I was very fortunate one year when I did one of their advertising campaigns. They gave me carte blanche with my girlfriend, who was also a Versace model, to go to their factory outlet in Torino and pick out anything we wanted. It was a joke. It was so fun. And I ended up getting a cashmere tuxedo from Versace that I was so proud of, and I wore it any place that it was appropriate to. That tuxedo for me was my favorite thing, but I also had a lot of simple black Versace jackets, and they were always very gracious about clothing some of their models.
In the world of art or anything that you do, you want to walk down the street and go, oh, that's a Versace piece right there. And there was unquestionable that he had that. You knew exactly what a Versace was and whatever. And I think that at that time he took fashion to another level, inclusive with the entertainers that he had. I think he was the first one responsible for adding all of those people to the fashion, when they went to see the fashion shows. All of the actors, musicians, those were the people that filled Gianni Versace's shows. It wasn't the socialites or whatever. He changed that, and he made the fashion shows an event, a rock and roll event, rock and royalty. You know, so I think that even now, today, Versace is immortal. Versace will remain. The name Versace will live on forever.
I think the biggest difference between the type of models Gianni hired and what other designers were hiring models is Gianni liked the men to not fit his clothes. Like he was really one of the first designers that hired big guys, put them in tight clothing. You know, I remember the jeans being tighter than the jeans we're wearing today. You know, shirts, sleeveless leather. I think he was right there at the moment of like the peak of masculinity when it came to male models. All the guys from, you know, James Hyde you were talking to and the guys that he mentioned. I see these guys today and I look, I'm like, wow, man, you look good, you're tough, masculine. It's a strong group. A lot of those guys I see now and they still look good and they're strong. I think Gianni was really, that was that era in that mid 90s where, you know, the men were men and the women were dynamic. And now it's, you know, a mixing pot of everything, which is awesome as well.
So I landed in Miami, it was summer of 1992. 1992, and to this day I have an apartment in South Beach on Collins Avenue to this day. Those first days of South Beach were the most relaxed of days. It wasn't as gentrified. You had Ocean Drive, you had maybe Michel Palmier, you had Ford, you had a few modeling agencies on Ocean Drive, but a lot of the other buildings were boarded up. But his home, Casa Casarina, and then he tore down the Riviera Hotel, which was the flanking building next to him, he all of a sudden gave a renaissance and a rebirth to South Beach. He all of a sudden gave this, you know, in many ways ghettoed town now a revitalization. And so those years were the most special years. I remember fashion shows at Warsaw Ballroom, fashion shows at Paragon, and they were Versace type fashion shows. And they had rooms that were Versace rooms with Medusas on the walls. And people were like, yeah, we would call each other on the phone. This was before like a lot of usage of the cell phones. They had more of those brick phones back then, but we would call each other on the phone on a landline. It's like, hey, where are you going out tonight? Oh, we're gonna go to Paragon, or we're gonna go to this. I'll be in the Versace section. And people were like, the Versace section? And it was an entire area where there were all Medusas, and like everyone would go there and they would meet in this area. So it was the most crazy, fun, most exciting time back then. And I remember pictures of myself with Donatella and Mickey Rourke at his club Mickey's, and just hanging out there at Mickey's with Paul Beck, and Paul's behind me. And I was showing Mickey Rourke, I was on the cover of Non Solo Pasta, this Italian magazine, and Mickey's laughing and Donatella's laughing. And we're all together in a club just having fun on Washington Avenue. And it was such a naive day that we didn't think of everything. We knew that we were part of maybe a contribution to the fashion world, but we didn't know that that all of us were like mini rock stars in our own town, because people very much followed us and looked up to us, but we didn't know that. We just thought we were just, doing what we love.
So I was fortunate enough to work on this day where we had 5 of the biggest supermodels, minus obviously no. This is one of the favorite shoots I've ever been on. I got to work with all 5 of these supermodels, minus Naomi Campbell, of course. We have Tatiana, Stephanie Seymour, Claudia Schiffer, Cindy Crawford, and Christy Turlington.
Our work relationship was much bigger than that because, we were able to travel with him to San Moritz and spent New Year's Eve in the Bahamas on a boat. There was only, I think, like 6 of us that were there. That was a special guest from him. Being able to, see him in Lake Como and Milan and be able to have that moment of not only working with him, but actually sharing time, breaking bread, having dinners and talking and laughing and being able to have all that outside of all that was something very special, and I'll never forget it.
It's incredible. And it still impacts me, like when you're asking that question, it still has an impact to this day, because the funny, crazy thing about some of the great designers like Gianni is the stuff is timeless. So in many ways, industry-wise, if I'm meeting with somebody, they'll tell me to this day, oh, I remember this, and it'll still also bring in, new opportunities as well. So it's like it sort of never goes away. I liken it to if somebody in Hollywood does like a film that it becomes a classic film, people don't forget about it, and they'll be like, wow, who was in that film, and they'll pull them out. But fashion at that time, I don't think it really exists that way anymore, unfortunately, because of the internet and Instagram and all that. But back then, if you were a part of like a major campaign like this, I mean, there was millions of dollars invested in something like this, and they made it sort of very much like somebody would make like a film.
"16 years ago today, to the day, a young designer named Gianni Versace began a label that would raise the heat on fashion runways around the world. From his studded, strapped leather women's clothing to menswear that inspired the Miami Vice look, Gianni Versace has been a fashion controversy itself. Just last week, a new Versace collection with transparent women's tops was the talk of this town. And I'm pleased to have him here, not just to talk about fashion, but also to talk about lifestyle and culture and a lot of other things. Welcome. Great to have you here.
It's a pleasure.
Tell me what it is. What are you best known for? What is the look that you think brings you the greatest sense of satisfaction?
I play with my work. I think the thing I want to be remembered is what I will do tomorrow. What I did is boring to me. Yeah. I think I'm too classic.
Too classic?
Yeah.
In other words, you don't think that you're pushing further enough out to the edges?
It's never enough in this work, I think. Yeah. You have to really break barrier every day. Fashion, to me, born and die every day.
Yeah, so this boat we're shooting this little bay in Capri Island. We were out on the water, and they just had the boat pushed out, and we were kind of pulling the boat back and forth, and Bruce was shooting around it, but he had her and I kind of like interacting together and apart, and really took his time with it. And it was pretty remarkable and amazing too to have the opportunity to shoot with her in that way. She is still very much so. Whenever I run into her, she's just such a wonderful person, real sweet and friendly and kind. And again, look at this. Look at just all these little outtakes, like there's me in a bathtub, and then you see, look at Helena, look how beautiful she looks there. And
for me, I always will have the most positive memories of him, because I came from Baltimore, Maryland, and my first introduction really to the fashion world was Gianni, and he really showed me the way. And I think that I owe him a great deal, and maybe subsequently he may not have known he's helped so many people, but he has, and he has given careers to people to this day. He has given freedom to so many people to this day, and the styles that he used with, you know, Byzantine motifs and neoclassical motifs, I feel that they were so beyond their time. I mean, we were wearing things that today you wear them and you're like, whoa, this is great. And when I talk to people about him, everyone always, you know, remembers those golden days of South Beach, those golden days of his collection. So
he truly was passionate about what he did, and certainly so am I. I'm a photographer and a filmmaker now, and if you're not passionate, you should do something else. He was such a gentleman. He was gracious and obviously very artistic, and the people around him seemed to really love him. You know, I never heard any model say anything derogatory about Gianni. He was always, it was an honor to work for him, and he was always a pleasure to be around, and he's always so enthusiastic, like a little kid running around backstage, so excited, and we all wanted to do our best for Gianni, you know, and Lord knows he put on the most spectacular shows in Milan, without question. He had the coolest guys, the most beautiful girls, and wow, it was fun, super fun. So glad I was a part of it.
He helped with many different fashion shows and would give his clothing, and Melissa would also help with that too, throughout the entire community, for many different charities, not just one. I mean, he was like, at the time, one of, you know, along with the Bee Gees, which she said moved over to the other side after looking at this house, but he really was one of, at the time, the most famous designers around. And like Romero Brito's always giving, it was the same type of thing with Gianni, what you saw. I mean, he was a complete philanthropist. He totally went out of his way to help anybody. And the Bee Gees did too, you know? So Miami had like these really great people that really, really went out of their way to make a difference in other people's lives.
Do you remember we would walk out in the shows? He just had this smile, and he loved us. Like I loved him because he loved us. He loved the guys. He loved hanging out with the guys. He really did. And that's like what James was saying. He would take everybody to concerts, invite them to his house, have dinners for him. He was so unguarded with his tight group. And he was so loyal, you know. Every time I meet a model, I'll like look back at something, I just like, oh my God, he was there, and he was there, and I met you there, and you realize we're the same group of guys for that like 5 or 6 year time span that he was loyal to, and you know, it doesn't happen anymore.
He did so much for me for how I felt about myself as an artist, because he had such, he treated me with such care and respect. And when I would come to work in the morning, he was always up, and if he was in the courtyard and he was sketching or, you know, working on something, he was really, I had so much respect for him. And then the way he treated me was like I was, you know, I don't know how to say that. I'm not sure how to say it. He made me feel very, I don't want to say worthy of, you know, but he treated me in a certain way with respect.
One of the most amazing moments is we're on South Beach and they're building a stage, and we're like, wow, what's going on? Well, I believe wholeheartedly that Gianni had everything to do with that, where Pavarotti performed for free on South Beach. And it was one of the most wonderful nights that I can remember on South Beach. And so all of that music you can see through his designs, whether it be with the furniture or the clothes. I think all of that is represented in his designs.
After finishing my degree at Johns Hopkins, I called my parents and I said that I'm no longer working at Mount Sinai. I'm going to be a male model. So they were like, what? And so it was at first a shock, but my parents were very supportive of me, and I explained to them what occurred, and I'll be doing fashion shows. And so my first show was at Bell Harbor Shops, and it was great modeling there. And then I went to Milan, Athens, Greece, Paris, France, and it was because of Gianni, who was so the visionary. He created this community. All of a sudden, the ghettoed buildings and the places that people would not go to, they would go to, and it revitalized our community. There was a few bars back then. It was the Sinatra Club was here next to Michel Palmier, and there were little clubs here and there, but all of a sudden, you felt like you were in the in crowd because you wore Versace, you modeled for Versace, and it was a feeling that was so unique. There was a camaraderie between models, and it was a great energy.
When you go to the question of design, do you prefer menswear or women's wear? Does it matter?
No, I think when I work for fashion, it's the same for me. It's like drinking fresh water. I love my work. I'm play with my work, and then I like to design, not just for fashion. I design a lot for theater too. Yeah. I adore.
And also for rock musicians.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you cannot stuck in one field when you be a designer. You have to use different way to work, and dance, music is so appeal to me.
If you weren't a designer, what would you be? What would you do?
Of course, a music composer.
Yeah, composer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
My idol when I was teenager was Bacharach and all the American music, Gershwin. And
I went to San Jose and all that.
Yeah. And I want to study music. My mother said, no, you stay with me. And my mother was a dressmaker, and it's like something was in my blood, in my family, you know.
She was the primary influence on you becoming a designer?
Absolutely.
Miami was on a movement. I moved there in 1990, and you could tell Miami, you could feel it, that Miami was on the move. But Miami certainly was nothing until Gianni came and brought down his influences and took what we were saying earlier about the palm trees and the sun and all of the essence that Miami had. And he wanted to make a collection based on that. And so he would, when we shot the Miami stories, we shot on the beach, we shot in the Everglades, like you said. He wanted to encapsulate everything Miami had to offer. So that's why we shot in so many different, Miami, you're walking down the street, you could shoot anywhere. It was such an amazing place to shoot.
Gianni Versace was the first one to create the full package of a brand. He put celebrities, he put rock stars, he put supermodels all together. He would dress people like Princess Diana, Lady Diana, and Elton John, and then Madonna. He had everyone mixed together. He would dress Prince. He would dress Tina Turner. He would do all this. And then Michael Jackson was always going to Studio 54, and Michael Jackson would wear Versace. And so at a very, very early career of Michael Jackson, it was his love of Versace and his sense of style, that beaded glove and the detailing of his jacket all stem from Gianni Versace's designs.
There's great moments that I had with Elton John, going back to the house in Milano. Elton John was already Sting, Axl Rose, Michael Hutchins when he was still around. It was the who's who of entertainment was always around. And Gianni was with Elton when we were in New York, when we did actually in London when we did the Sting. We did another rock and roll show we did, and Elton was very much part of that. But as long as I can remember, Elton was part of that Gianni Versace design, where he loved it. I think it represented, kind of in a way what Elton was all about. So he couldn't have picked a better designer to have that merge that team.
I have very fond memories that after the shows, having amazing parties at Gianni's house and also Donatello's house, with a bevy of celebrities and a few of the models, and it was super fun. Unbelievably classy and tasteful that I was starstruck every corner that I turned to, between Axl Rose and Elton John. And I went, actually there was a dinner after a show that we did in Paris. So yeah, we did do a show in Paris. And they rented a private villa at the Ritz-Carlton on Place Vendôme in Paris. And I walked in there with my girlfriend, who, as I mentioned, was also a Versace model. I mean, there was Cindy Crawford and Richard Gere. There was Wendy Christensen, Naomi Campbell, Axl Rose. And there's a funny story that Steven Seagal showed up, and Naomi Campbell was standing there. And Steven was like, in tasseled leather, this big guy. And Naomi goes, "I'm sorry, but I don't really know who you are." And Steven looked down and goes, "What, have you been living in a cave?" True story.
It's a fabulous dream in here. It really is. It's something beautiful created by a man who, he had no limits on himself. What he dreamt, he wanted to create. That's how I feel about this, what he did here.
Actually, out of all the houses, I would say I remember being in the Miami house. It was very much like being in this house. Everything you touched, they were like, "Put that down. You have no idea how much that is." And even today, I went to set something down, and you're like, "No, that's art. That's not a table." But I remember going around the Miami house and going, "How much is that worth? How much is that worth? How much is that worth?" And yeah, it was just being in this world. It was larger than life. He had extravagant taste, but he didn't walk around like a guy who had extravagant taste.
He created a club environment everywhere he was. Melissa Sardinia, she opened up the first Gianni Versace jeans couture boutique between Washington and Collins Avenue. And so he blocked off the entire street and he made a mini club. And that was a grand opening of his collection. And so he would go there. He would go to another club called Paragon. Paragon later became Level nightclub, but before that it was called Glam Slam, Prince's Club. And so he would be there, always having a party, always inviting people to his table, and there would be an abundance of, drinks for you, spring water, whatever you wanted. It was always great.
So that house was named Casa Casuarina when it opened. And there are two possible inspirations for the name. One is that in the hurricane, in 1926, there was a huge hurricane in September, and that left only one casuarina tree standing on the property. And the other inspiration is a set of stories by Somerset Maugham called The Casuarina Tree. It's 6 actually tragic stories of British in Indonesia. So kind of northerners in a southern location.
I had a friend who was working here as an artist because he was hiring every artist he could find in South Florida, and she needed an assistant. They were always on a schedule to finish the work, and so she got me in here to do some artwork.
Gianni Versace, as far as his designs and his collection and why he was so revered by like the rock and roll industry and in the film industry and the fashion industry, it was because he did everything different, really, quite frankly. I mean, everything. Like an example is we showed that the template of the ladybug. That was like a scarf, a beautiful silk scarf, and he'd decided to do a whole line of men's shirts, for example, based on something like that. He would get inspired and then just springboard that into an entire line of clothing. And the rock and roll influence, his relationship with Elton John, for example, stands out. And his, Prince and these great rock and rollers they wanted to have this Versace, vibe about them on stage because it was so my gosh, like the same way like music is so expressive, Gianni Versace's clothing, it wasn't just something you wore, it was an expression. You know, it really was. It was like there was a melody to it, really. When you had on a Versace, you know, jacket or a sweater or a shirt, I mean, you were telling it, you weren't just walking down the street in a shirt. I mean, it was an expression. And, you know, it actually brought out something in the wearer, like when I wore it, for example. And so I could definitely understand where an Elton John or a Prince wanted to have it on, because it was an expression unto itself, and it brought out creativity in its wearers, and I think it really resonated with the entertainment world at large, the music business, the film industry, but I think also with the general public globally, because it was like nobody'd seen anything like it before.
Gianni, I think, loved everybody, and that's why I think that he decided to build this amazing house in South Beach, right on Ocean Drive. And I think that one of the things he did, he loved people so much that he loved the fact that he could open up his door, walk down to the news cafe, grab his papers, and be able to have that freedom. But he loved it. He wanted to be, people would by and Johnny, hey, how are you? And he would be very talkative and just love that part of like being around everybody. And just being around the people in Miami Beach, you know, he was like I said. I mean, I keep going on about what a nice person. I mean, we were able to travel with him to St. Moritz and Bahamas. We spent New Year's Eve on the boat, and you know, Lake Como, but he was always, when he was around, he was such a gentle, loving person, and such a giving person. You know?
Well, supposedly Via Jesu was his workhouse. I mean, and he worked all the time. He called, I think his second house was Lake Como, and he called that his Proust house. He would go to reflect. But this is where he relaxed and had fun. This was his party house. So I think that was the purpose of this house. So he used bright colors that you don't see in some of his, brighter colors. Kind of a big celebration and enjoyment. So some of the people that stayed here were Elton John. So Elton John and he were very close friends. They were apparently like two little kids together. They would get on the telephone and laugh, and they were both kind of restless geniuses. And they met in Milan one day when Elton John went into the shop and asked the manager if he could meet Versace. So the manager locked the door and asked Versace to come down. And apparently they hit it off like long-lost friends. So Elton John was having problems with substance abuse at the time. I think Donatella and Gianni supported him. And then he returned the favor later. When Donatella had problems with substance abuse, he staged an intervention. After Gianni's death, he invited Antonio D'Amico to his homes for holidays and kind of looked after him. So he stayed here. He stayed on this floor, actually, probably right next door was the room where he stayed. Madonna stayed here. She loved the way the Versaces lived, as if it were a dream. And also, she liked, Gianni was so generous and so kind that she would try to kind of trick him, pull his leg and ask for more and more just to see if she would get a no, and he always said yes. So she stayed in the last room in the guest wing, the only room in the house that has a bathtub. So that was her. And she celebrated her 40th birthday here. Apparently there was a gigantic cake that was lowered into the pool, and young guys wearing Versace bathing suits were in the pool cutting up the cake and serving it.
Well, when I walk in, I see a celebration of his joy, a celebration of his knowledge of neoclassical style, his celebration of human experiences, his celebration of Italian art history. I mean, this is a study of great, just a great challenges in lives. You have all these different periods mixed together, and it's challenging to take Art Deco and other style of arts and put them all together. And he did, and it was a great challenge, and he did it so effortlessly. And I look around, and everything that I see, it reminds me of what he was doing. He was trying to leave a legacy behind for a next generation to say, this is what beauty could be like, and here it is. So
Versace was so exuberant and so full of life and just full of imagination and creativity, and that was his dining room, and that's the perfect dining room for him. I mean, Versace never liked to leave anything undecorated, so everything was a celebration of life. So my favorite part is that the stones are cut to look like jewels, and then the stained glass windows also have parts that are cut like jewels as well.
I think the Milano home was work. Lake Como was definitely more of a relaxation. Miami was party. It was a party. I mean, because when we went there, the first time we went there for dinner, we ate outside by the pool, and there was a show. I got a great story. So we're at a concert in Italy, and my wife and I, Suling, were walking up, and so we walked down the aisle, and either you sat to the left and you represented Elton John, or you sat to the right and you represented Eric Clapton with Giorgio Armani. So it was almost like going down the aisle and saying, okay, I'm with the groom or the bride or the groom, and it was very definitive that way. Our support was totally with Gianni. Of course, we sat with Elton John was our team, and then Eric Clapton with Giorgio Armani was their team. So it was stuff like that was so fun at the time to be able to kind of gravitate towards that artist that represented Gianni Versace. And of course, we know Elton John was a humongous, and still is, a big fan of Gianni Versace.
Via Gesù was the first property, and it was a bit of a scandal because it belonged to the Rizzoli family. And I don't think the Versaces were really accepted into Milan society. There's a lot of difference between northern Italians and southern. I think Milan is more of a Calvinist work ethic. I think the Versaces were seen as very flamboyant, and people were saying, well, how did they get the money to buy one of the oldest house and most important houses here? And I think it's a tribute to his brother Santo and his financial skills that they were able to buy a property of that importance.
Well, my area of specialty. I was a little nervous when I first started working here because I didn't have experience doing things on cue. Like paint this flower, do this thing. I felt a little nervous, and sort of to start me out, they gave me little things to do, and then I got faster and more confident. And when Versace came into town, he would come a couple of times, to check on the work and to see how it was going. And he always had a new idea for something that he wanted to add to what was happening. And he remembered me from my modeling days.
I think the thing I love about the house is the beauty and the genius of Versace. So when I first started giving tours here, no matter what mood I was in when I came here, I was in a better mood when I left, because there's so much beauty here. And I really think it's a tribute to his generosity, his kindness, his sweetness. And I think I would like people to know that he was like that.
Every designer has their own unique thing, and he was definitely one of the most distinctive. He started off with a little thing, and it was in his bedroom. It was just this little trim work on his built-in cabinets, just to do these little gold leaves and little Greek key, and just simple things. And then he asked, well, could you do this, a flower? So I started to do that, and here and there, and it just expanded from there to where I was doing a lot of added on things because there are birds and plants and flowers in every room, and that was sort of my specialty. Flowers and birds were my specialty. I was one of the last artists to come onto the property, and so all the major work was done, but every time he would come in, he would have a new idea for something, and that was always saved for me to add birds or flowers. So starting with Donatella's bedroom, he wanted parrots and birds and flowers coming off the side of around the doorway and coming down, and roses dripping down the walls, and that's the kind of thing was my specialty, became my specialty.
Let me show some things here. These are from magazines, so I don't know if we'll be able to see them, but it just shows you, I think, well, I don't know.
The cover is the cover.
Yeah, take a look at this. Tell me what we're seeing. Here it is. What's this?
Is Stephanie Seymour shot by Avedon.
Yeah.
Is the winter collection.
Right. Next slide.
Christy Turlington is a cover that was designed for the AIDS benefit. Is a cover of Vogue by a great photographer, embroidery on.
Who is the photographer there?
Patrick de Marchelier.
Oh, sure, I know him. The next one
is Irving Penn.
This is Claudia Schiffer's back. This is before. Who is that fellow that she's with now?
It's very controversial
What's
collection.
his name? What's the guy that she's with now?
Irving Penn.
Yes. All right.
Genius.
All right.
Another one.
Okay. Next slide. This is menswear. What's that?
Menswear, very loose and simple.
Loose and simple. You like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Comfort.
Right, let me just look at a couple of these things here. There's another one. Tell me what's the next slide. This is
leather blouson.
Yeah.
Classic.
What do you most want to do? What's the driving passion, the driving dream?
Driving dream now, I love to do a great movie. You know, I like to design the costume for a movie. I like...
That's probably easy to do. I mean, I would think you could do that if you had...
If you find a good director and a good script, it's not easy.
To find a good director and a good script.
Making a campaign in this era of the fashion industry, you know, where like you had like supermodels like Cindy Crawford and Naomi Campbell and Helena Christensen, a campaign photo shoot was very, very much like a film production, a movie, major motion picture production, which millions of dollars were spent, the craft services, the amount of like people on set and the production company, and just everything was done like really over the top, and it was meant to tell a full-blown story. You weren't just there to shoot like a sport coat and leave. I mean, you were there to tell like a whole story about like the company and the season and whatever the designer, in this case Gianni Versace, the legendary Gianni Versace, what the story he wanted to tell about where he was at in his life and where he was at in his, you know, and his vision in the fashion world. I find this really interesting to throw in because you were talking about like the footage. That's me. That's my camera filming. I was filming, you know, the filming of it. So it's pretty neat.
Gianni Versace was very instrumental in the film world because a lot of the films he also dressed, like Dre, the movie. He was the one that did the costuming for that. In the movie later on, Showgirls, where they say, "Oh, I'm wearing Versace," it was, you know, that was the thing, and he contributed across the board. When it came to models, he made a lot of people's careers happen. You know, Steve Lyons. Of course, you had Rick Arango, you had Marcus Schenkenberg, who had this, you know, this huge career just kind of explode because of him. And then you had Matt King, who did the campaigns with him, NYC. And of course, that everyone has always said it's James Hyde, who was the quintessential Versace model that is iconic. Like forever and ever, when people think of the big golden era of Versace, they think of you, and they think of a lot of your contributions that were edgy and non-traditional that he did. And that was what made him so special. Non-traditionally putting a tattoo all over your body and walking on the runway. Non-traditionally putting you in partial bondage leather gear was not necessarily what all the other designers were doing, but he was doing it, and he thought it was great. And he would mix this wonderful silk shirt, embroidered shirt with leather, cabretta lambskin leather, with beading and detailing and hardware, all together culminating this great look. So he covered the gamut.
Some of the models I work with, some of the guys I worked with were Rick Arango, which was one of my buddies I love very much. Steve Lyon was a great guy. I didn't really work that much with Steve, but he was in that realm. Cameron was a very dear friend of mine that I used to hang out with in Paris. And Cameron and I would play backgammon from, we'd probably play 24 hours a day. Every time we went to an audition, we'd be playing backgammon. So really amazing stories about those guys. Women, the women that I loved to work with was Christy Turlington. To me, was not only a beautiful woman, but she was an amazing person on the inside and a true beauty. And I think that she had everything. And so she was, to me, one of my favorites that I ever worked with. Claudia Schiffer, I did a big show with in London for the Sting, the Rainforest Foundation. I mean, when you get up close and you work with these iconic women, and then you learn Stephanie Seymour, Claudia Schiffer, Linda Evangelista. I mean, and I think that Gianni Versace actually was the one responsible for coining the supermodel. So without Gianni creating these wonderful events, I don't think the supermodel would have been as known as it is today. And so without him doing that, we wouldn't have those supermodels. But anyway, Christy Turlington to me was the best. And my wife, Su Ling. My wife, Su Ling, I've worked with my wife, Su Ling, and she is absolutely the most gorgeous woman I've ever seen in my life. So this is a whole assortment of my journey with Gianni Versace. This is Tony Tonenberg, who shot us in Milano. This is me in Japan. This is Doug Ordway, who shot the majority of everything. This is the performance that we did in Milano that Gianni wanted us to do with Naomi. And this was my first job that I ever shot with Versace in Japan. Tyra Banks and I in the London show for Sting. This is the London show that we had done with Claudia Schiffer and all of the models. And I have no idea who they are.
How do you work? I mean, how do you spend your day?
I think I live all my life close to my work. I really live through my work, and I start working every morning. I wrote a lot. I say, I want to imagine a woman who walk on the street with a simple dress, no makeup, or totally different, very sophisticated. And then I translate into my design. But the first thing is to write down. It's like a journal every day.
A journal. Yeah. You write it or you put it in? You type it?
No, I write by hand.
You know, I would honestly say the first memory, the strongest memory would be the first time I met him was his smile. And I'll repeat myself over and over again, but he had a contagious smile. And if you see any pictures of him at the shows, or if you see him with any of these celebrities or models, he was just so happy. He was so happy. And that's all I kind of remember. And I'm happy. You know, I remember I did these shows. I remember being at this house and that house, but I'll never remember more of him coming down in his doorway, opening it up, and there was like this icon of a designer smiling at me, and that's what I remember the most.
What are the good things that have come to your life as a result of meeting?
Well, understanding of people and kindness, and because someone was kind to me like Gianni Versace, I knew how to be kind to others. Of course, there has to be a lot of your own personal, family values included in that, but he was that kind of unique designer and individual. One story that sticks out is that I was going to a fitting at his home in Milano on Via Gesù, and it was in the winter, and I was wearing thermals, and I had to go down the steps of his house and down of the basement of his house. As far as the eye could see were sewing machines, and all these wonderful Italian women in front of their sewing machines. They were like putting together the collection, because he used to run his fashion shows in his house. He used to have his own runway on Via Gesù and seating with pillows, with Versace Baroque pillows and so forth. And I remember I was wearing thermals, and I had to wear these leather pants, and they were too tight. And I'm like, I must be eating too much food or eating too much gelato. And I was saying, what's going on? And so the lady says, no, take them off. And I was like, okay. So I took off the thermals, and they fit perfectly. And there was another model that was also being fitted, and he was from England. And I remember there was a table. He had a mirror, and half of it was a mirror and the other was his face in a distance. And there was a table with paninis. And this model was from England, and he hadn't been doing any fashion shows, and he really didn't have money. I remember him taking his backpack and stuffing sandwiches in his backpack. And then all of a sudden, around the corner, Gianni was walking by. And I saw Gianni, and I was going to tell the model, like, put those sandwiches back. And Gianni walked over, and he took the sandwiches and put them in his backpack and put another one in there and zipped it up, because he understood that model, this was his only job maybe, or this only fitting that he could have had. And I'll never forget that he was so kind at that moment. And so what I take back from it is that he was a man who cared about everyone, that no matter who you were, what walk of life you were, what color your skin, he was accepting of you.
Gianni learned that my wife and I got married in February, and they were in Miami, and they said, you know what, we're going to create a party for Suling and James, and we're going to do it at the Fontainebleau and the Frank Sinatra suite, and iconic room at that time. And we celebrated. We had an amazing party, and we were just so grateful that they did that for us. Because that's who Gianni was. Gianni was somebody who was very giving, and he loved love. I mean, he was a person from that. I mean, Donatella and Gianni were brother and sister, and they were just an amazing team, and you could tell that they really loved each other. And I think Gianni was all about that, all about love.
The real irony here is they were struggling with trying to get like the cufflinks and all that involved, and the photographer and Donatella and Gianni basically, were sort of like, they were struggling with it. And so I just came up with this idea, and it was also the state of mind I was in, like, because Bruce loved like interaction, and Donatella was really she was talking in Italian, which I couldn't understand, but she was saying like something to the effect of like, get more, we want more, like more energy, get more going on. And at the time I was going to a gym on a regular basis, and I was training, but instead of training with like weights, I was doing a lot of like speed bag with and a lot of like body exercises, like push-ups, sit-ups, all the old school kind of stuff. But I was punching a heavy bag and a speed bag, so I was really in that kind of like zone. And so I just sort of took that, and I have this suit on, which is really ironic, and I just started boxing with the camera. And Donatella really kind of like helped guide that, because she was really like, yes, Moss, like more, like, so I was boxing with the camera. So there's all kinds of outtakes I had seen in Bruce's studio, and they used this, turned into the Versace fragrance. I was doing a photo shoot for Condé Nast. It was a Vogue editorial with Shalom Harlow, and there was a lot of different designers. It was like a 20-page editorial, and they were bringing in a lot of different, you bring up music, Jamiroquai, the artist was there, and Leonardo DiCaprio was brought in, but the thing was based around Shalom Harlow, and they were bringing in different, John Galliano was part of it, and Karl Lagerfeld. So this dinner was at Karl Lagerfeld's house in Paris. and Gianni Versace was invited, so he was there as well. And this home was just so gorgeous and ornate with these high ceilings and marble floors. And Gianni comes up to me, and I felt like when I first walked in, I was really intimidated by all the people in the room. And I did not know, because it was just preceding this, but it's my favorite singular moment with Gianni Versace, because I did not know what about the campaign yet. The photo shoot had been done, but I didn't know anything that was about to happen. And Gianni Versace comes up to me like this. He walks up to me like Gianni Versace. He walks up to me with like this boxing, and he's like kind of like jarring, with me. So I'm like doing this, and he looks at me. He goes, and then he took my hand, and held it, and he goes, "You're my man, Machu." He goes, you're my man. You're my man. And I was like, wow. So I didn't realize what he meant, but what he meant was, you're the guy for this thing.
The campaign in Milan with, I think it was Tony Thornburg, and my agent called me and said, "Steve, do you have a brother?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "Well, he's at the airport." And I said, "Fuck, go pick him up and send him to the studio." And my brother showed up, and Gianni took one look at him and put him in the campaign with me. And my brother's first modeling gig in his whole fucking life was the Versace campaign. And I'm very proud of that, and I love it, and it's a true story. And it rocketed his career to be quite successful afterwards. And David, after that gig, started doing the show every season with me, and we used to walk the runway a lot together. Gianni thought it was funny to have two brothers out there. So that's one of my favorite things with him, I would say, for sure.
If the tragedy never happened and Gianni would walk into this room right now, what would you say to him?
What show can we do? Let's go. What's next? I would love to see what Gianni would do today with the mix of fashion, with the mix of nationalities and the mix of cultures. I think he's like a Madonna. Madonna was constantly evolving. Gianni Versace was constantly evolving. He was one of those designers that took risk. He was daring. He went against the critics. I would probably just try to greet him with the same smile he's greeting me, and give him a big hug and just tell him how much I love him and thank him for the opportunity. He really put my career in motion.
I would most likely say, you gave me such great hope, and you gave me such great memories, and you gave me such great encouragement, and I thank you for that. Maybe, I don't know. Or maybe let's raise a toast. 100 anni, to 100 years of life, happiness, health, and prosperity.
The only thing that I would say is thank you to Gianni for giving me such a wonderful 3 years being around you, being influenced by some of your creations, your art, your personality. You were a very giving person, and I learned a lot from that. But I would just, in my words, just say thank you for everything that you've done for me, and I love you.
Dude, why aren't I shooting your campaign? Oh, I don't know. Ciao, man. Ciao, como stai? I would want him to be proud, because I've been a photographer now for over 20 years. So, and I was certainly influenced by that era in what I do. And it's still an influence, and I refuse to change. So I would love him to be kind of proud of the photographer that I've become, and then I would say, fuck, let's work together for sure.
Well, in that era, being a model and working and having the opportunity to work with Richard Avedon and Bruce Weber, those were the goals as a male model. You work with those photographers that kind of set your career, and it did for a lot of us. And that was a lot because they were Gianni Versace campaigns, and he was the guy picking us to do that. So he definitely gave me a strong foot into the game. The only regret I probably have was there got to a point where I wanted to be an actor, and so back in the 90s, you couldn't be an actor and model. You weren't looked or taken seriously, and So I just stopped wanting to do the shows. I stopped wanting to do the campaigns. And, you know, looking back at James' career and looking at all the photos, I was kind of jealous that I got out a little early and didn't get to continue on and be part of that family.
He is our century's designer. For me, this entire century of designers, they're great designers, Karl Lagerfeld, Miu Miu, Prada, there's all these designers, but he is my number one favorite designer of this century, and he is a genius.
Well, as I'd mentioned before, I've been a photographer now for over 20 years, living in Paris. And I've now assembled my first coffee table books and the whole gallery thing. I don't really shoot fashion anymore so much. And I just finished editor-in-chief and creative director of a new magazine called Indulge, which is really geared more towards the arts, and it supports the environment and wildlife, and very much image-based, but it has nothing to do with fashion. It's the imagery in the magazine is really more timeless. It's not sensitive to the seasons, and it'll be a biannual magazine called Indulge. And I'm currently up here in the mountains, in my family's cabin, editing a documentary that I directed and produced called Something That Matters. And it's I went on a 1,000K journey. I also shoot wildlife, by the way. I went on a 1,000K journey throughout Africa with a film crew and chased the story of the rhinos. And it took almost 4 months, and it changed my life. Unbelievable experience. And I'm going to finish the edit, hopefully in time to make it to Sundance this next year. So that's what I'm doing. And yeah, it's who knew, right? When you're walking the runway, you don't really know that you'll be doing documentaries 20 years later. But that's what I'm doing.
I mean, everywhere, you know, you walked, everywhere he was, he saw beauty, and he took that beauty and he put it on people's backs. He put the beauty that he saw and celebrated who you were and his designs and his cuts. I mean, guys didn't wear such kind of edgier clothes. I mean, he introduced, you know, all this cool leather gear and cool leather belts with Medusas and studding, and this great chain, this Medusa Versace chain that I, you know, always keep my keys on. He introduced this, you know, fashion that was stylish and yet functional, and he was great at doing that. So.
On July 15th, 1997, Gianni Versace was murdered on the steps of his Miami home by Andrew Cunanan.
I was in South Beach, and I was at my apartment, and actually Kiko Versace was staying at my place because he was going to go over to Gianni's house the very next morning because he just came in from Italy. And so Kiko and I were really excited about going over. And so I remember hearing that I was on 10th and Collins and his home was Ocean Drive between 10th and 11th. And I remember there were gunshots, and then I hear all these people yelling and screaming, and then I go outside and I instinctively walked up the street because that's where I went to go to lay out at the beach, which is on 10th and Ocean. And there was Gianni, and it was so overwhelming, and it was like, is this real? Is this happening? Am I dreaming this? Is that what's going on? And I felt like, in some ways, that a friend was just taken away from you. I had that growing up. My friend was 14 years old and he had passed away, and that same kind of feeling of that, you know, all of a sudden something that you cared about and someone that was so nurturing and kind to you is no longer with you, and that was the feeling that I felt. And I remember afterwards it was just a series of, you know, reports about who was it that killed him and so forth, and then the conclusion of it was going to St. Patrick's Church in Miami off of Alton Road, and us being there and having a mass. And afterwards we went to the Versace Jeans Couture between Washington and Collins, and we broke bread together and reminisced about Gianni with Melissa Sardinia, who owned the Versace store in South Beach. And it was surreal, because it's like, is this really happening? And, you know, we fought the emotions of being angry, because that's not what Gianni wanted us to be. But our hearts went out to, you know, Donatella and to Santo and to Antonio, his devoted companion. And it affected everyone, because how do we take something that is so beautiful and rob the world of it? And so that was the way I was feeling at the time. But now I feel that through the years, although it's still very raw, maybe the world gets to know more about Gianni through all the great things and through all of his amazing collections that we have, and that the brand will continue for generations to come. And that's the most important thing. And the last thing I want to say is that, you know, no matter who we are, the one thing that we all have in common is we all dress. And Gianni gave us the freedom to dress.
I turned on CNN, and I mean, really shock. I mean, shock and sadness. I actually, just thinking about it, remembering, I don't like to think about it. And then I was, I have to say, enraged over it. I really was. That somebody so fantastic, generous, expansive, you know, who was building something, you know, creating and giving to people, you know, was gone. It's so pointless and stupid.
I was surprised. I think he's one of those individuals where you never imagined someone that would have that much like anger towards him. You know, I wasn't that intimate with Gianni outside of that introduction and doing a bunch of his shows and campaigns and stuff. But I do know that I was surprised. Like, you know, we die, we all die. That's an absolute. And sometimes you would, you know, it can come by accident. But when I heard it was like some crazy guy that murdered him, I think it just caused a little confusion for me. It didn't seem to make sense, because I could even see him in that moment probably still smiling, trying to figure out like what's going on here. So I think it just kind of it just surprised me. It really it took me by surprise. I don't remember quite what I felt emotionally, but I was a little shocked. It just didn't seem real. Like who would do something like that? You know, there are some mean designers out there. There's some mean people out there that you figure have something coming. He wasn't one of them. And I'm sure every single person that you interview will tell you at some point, Gianni made them feel good about themselves.
The first thing was, shock. And then not believing it, like, and then accepting that this really happened, and then the story, you know, and how this guy hunted him and the whole thing, and the boat. It just, what did we feel? What did I feel? I felt horrible. I felt like a wonderful life was just completely taken way too early and for absolutely no reason at all. None.
Wow. That was, wow. Well, I was in New York. There's a friend of mine named Tom Byer who lives in Japan, and Tom's called me 2 times in my life that early in the morning. One was 9/11. The other one was, he called me and said, turn on the TV, Gianni's been shot. My wife and I, Sue Ling, were in bed, and we woke up, and then we learned that he had died, and what a lovely, gentle genius, giving, loving person to be taken away by something so stupid and senseless. We were very sad. That we were just devastated.
I mean, I was stunned. Because I thought he was such a wonderful person. And it was somehow inconceivable that somebody would want to kill somebody like that. And I just remember, and it was on television 24 hours a day. And I just kept hearing these, when I still think about it, I hear these helicopters, because there were helicopters overhead the whole time, and you'd hear the blades whirring. So, and it just seemed, I thought maybe other people were shocked too, and that's why there was the coverage there was.
I was in shock. I heard it on the news. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't understand why. Who knew? Especially then, we didn't really know. We just thought he was gunned down on the steps of his incredible palace that he built in Miami. I just thought, what a loss, and I was sorry that I didn't get to see him again, because it had been some years since I saw him or worked for him when that happened. But I have nothing but great memories of being with Versace and being a Versace guy, part of their team. It was certainly one of the honors and highlights of my career, that's for sure.
This is really obviously very somber subject. The day Gianni was killed, I happened to be on a photo shoot, which is very telling of his influence on my life too, because I was on a photo shoot with Ralph Lauren, which at the time I had then had an exclusive contract with Polo Ralph Lauren, which is extremely rare in the industry for anyone to have an exclusive contract like that. And that was born by and large from, this powerful springboard of coming off of a Gianni Versace, worldwide campaign. And so I was on a photo shoot, a big, beautiful photo shoot for Ralph Lauren when I found out, and somebody from Ralph Lauren came onto set and said Gianni Versace was just shot and killed out in front of his house and in Miami Beach. And I just was so, I don't know how to even explain it. It was like the wind taken out of my sails, because it was just such an incredible shock. I mean, just for someone that you admired so much, had such a profound impact on your life, but that you knew personally. So there was just an admixture of things. And then for some reason, I remember the thought hitting me as it really resonated throughout that day, because then it became like all anyone could really talk about. And that was like, I wouldn't be here right now. I would not be sitting where I'm at right now. I would not be getting dressed in this look I'm in to do this photo shoot with Ralph Lauren here. I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for Gianni. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this, because this led to so many other things. It was the springboard for my career. It was the very first thing I did of any import. And it was the very first thing that I did that, was notable on a global scale in the fashion industry. So I wouldn't have been there.
I think my fashion appeals to individual people, and of course, a rock star are very individual. Personality try to express themselves in an individual way. I think that is the appeal of Versace. It's not for the boring people, that's for sure. Can be a rock star like Madonna or Courtney Love, mixed with Lady Di, who are all three are my customers. I want to be remembered when a man who tried to break a barrier in fashion, to put fashion on the street, to influence people in the best way. That is clear.